Anaconda wraps around baby elephant. Then the mother did this. The acacia forest breathed with the rhythm of midday heat, each leaf trembling in the gentle choreography of survival that defined this ancient landscape. Golden light filtered through the canopy in cathedral beams, illuminating patches of emerald grass that swayed like ocean waves beneath the African sun. In this theater of existence, where life and death perform their eternal dance, a mother elephant moved with the deliberate grace of millennia-old wisdom. Her massive form cast shadows that rippled across the earth as she grazed, each step a testament to the profound weight of maternal responsibility. The wrinkled landscape of her hide told stories of seasons survived, of droughts endured, of countless dawns witnessed in this unforgiving paradise. Her tusks, ivory monuments to her years, caught the light as she lifted her head to survey the world around her, not with paranoia, but with the measured vigilance of a creature who understood that paradise and peril were merely different faces of the same coin. Beside her, a universe of pure innocence explored the world on unsteady legs. The calf, barely 3 months old, embodied everything tender and vulnerable in this harsh landscape. Its trunk, still awkward and unpracticed, explored textures and scents with the wonder of discovery. Each movement was a question posed to the universe. What is this? How does it taste? Why does the world smell of dust and dreams and distant rain? The little elephant's ears, disproportionately large for its compact body, flapped with the enthusiasm of youth. It had not yet learned to read the subtle language of danger that permeated every breath in the wild. To the calf, the world was an endless playground of fascinating textures and mysterious sounds. It pressed close to its mother's legs, seeking the reassurance of contact, then bounded away to investigate a particularly intriguing butterfly, then returned again to the safety of proximity. This ritual of exploration and return, of curiosity balanced by caution, represented the fundamental education of the wild, learning the boundaries between safety and peril, understanding when wonder could be indulged and when survival demanded stillness. The mother watched with eyes that held both tenderness and the accumulated anxiety of every generation of mothers who had stood guard over their young in this beautiful, merciless place. Harold Whitaker observed this scene through eyes that had witnessed 8 decades of human experience, yet still found themselves humbled by the raw authenticity of wild existence. His weathered hands gripped a leather notebook that had become his confessional, the repository of observations that grew more profound with each passing year. The pages contained not just scientific notations, but moments of revelation, instances where the veil between human understanding and natural truth had grown thin enough to glimpse something eternal. He had positioned himself on a fallen baobab trunk, a natural observatory that provided clear sight lines while maintaining a respectful distance. This was the protocol he had developed over years of patient observation, close enough to witness, far enough to avoid interference. The notebook's worn pages fluttered in the breeze as he wrote, "A peaceful day in paradise." The words felt insufficient even as his pen formed them. But language always seemed to fail when confronted with the raw majesty of unmediated existence. Harold's career as a wildlife photographer had spanned continents and decades, but retirement had transformed his relationship with nature from documentation to communion. He no longer sought the perfect shot or the dramatic moment that would grace magazine covers. Instead, he pursued understanding, the deeper currents that flowed beneath the surface drama of predation and survival. The forest around them pulsed with invisible energy, somewhere in the canopy. Vervet monkeys chattered their complex social negotiations. A distant zebra's call echoed across the grassland, answered by another from the opposite direction. The soundscape wove itself into a symphony of existence, each voice representing not just an individual animal but an entire evolutionary lineage. Millions of years of adaptation and survival compressed into a single moment of being. But beneath this surface harmony, something else moved with ancient patience. In the dappled shadows where sunlight fragmented into scattered coins of gold, a presence waited with the stillness of geological time. The anaconda had been motionless for nearly 6 hours, its massive body so perfectly camouflaged that it seemed more landscape than creature. 23 feet of pure predatory intention lay coiled beneath a thin covering of fallen leaves, scales reflecting the patterns of light and shadow with such precision that they rendered the serpent nearly invisible. This was not the frantic urgency of smaller predators, but the patient calculation of an apex hunter. The anaconda's hunting strategy was built on the foundation of absolute stillness, the ability to become part of the environment so completely that prey would walk willingly into its range. It had fed 3 weeks ago on a young bushbuck, and hunger was not driving. This hunt opportunity was. The law of the wild dictated that when vulnerability presented itself, a predator must respond, regardless of immediate need. The snake's heat-sensing organs had detected the elephant's approach long before they became visible. The distinctive thermal signature of the adult presented no opportunity too large, too dangerous, too aware. But the smaller heat source, the one that moved with erratic patterns and maintained imperfect vigilance, represented possibility. The anaconda's primitive brain processed this information with the same ruthless efficiency that had allowed its species to survive for millions of years. The calf's wandering brought it incrementally closer to the concealed predator. Each playful investigation of a flower or pursuit of a beetle carried it further from absolute safety into the gray zone, where protection could not be guaranteed. The mother's attention followed her offspring's movements. But the forest was full of distractions, sounds that needed investigation, scents that required analysis. The constant environmental assessment that kept herbivores alive in a world full of hunters. Harold noticed the calf's increasing range of exploration and felt a familiar tension settle in his chest. His decades of wildlife observation had developed an almost supernatural sensitivity to the moments when the balance between safety and danger began to shift. Something in the quality of the light, the pattern of bird calls, the subtle change in the adult elephant's posture suggested that this peaceful scene was balanced on the edge of transformation. The moment arrived with the sudden inevitability of lightning. The calf, investigating a cluster of particularly colorful flowers, stepped within the anaconda's striking range. The serpent's attack was not a strike in the traditional sense, but an explosion of coiled energy that transformed stillness into motion with shocking speed. In less than a second, 23 feet of muscle had wrapped around the small elephant's torso, the coils tightening with hydraulic pressure that could crush bones and stop hearts. The calf's scream tore through the afternoon silence, like the sound of the world breaking. It was not merely a cry of pain, but a fundamental violation of the natural order, the voice of innocence confronting its own mortality. The sound carried frequencies that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the most primitive parts of the brain, the ancient circuits that recognized the cry of young and mortal danger. Harold's notebook fell from his hands as if gravity had suddenly intensified. His entire body went rigid with shock, muscles locking in a response older than civilization. Through his binoculars, he watched the unthinkable unfold, with the terrible clarity of a nightmare made manifest. The small elephant's legs kicked frantically at empty air, while the serpent's coils tightened with methodical precision. Each contraction of the anaconda's muscles represented millions of years of evolutionary refinement, the perfection of a killing technique that had remained unchanged since the age of dinosaurs. The mother elephant's response was instantaneous and seismic. Her peaceful grazing posture exploded into action as she spun toward the sound of her offspring's distress. The transformation was complete and terrible, from gentle giant to avenging force of nature in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Her trumpet of rage carried across the landscape like thunder, a sound that spoke of fury beyond human comprehension, of maternal love, weaponized into something that could shake the earth itself. She charged forward with the momentum of a freight train, her massive form generating tremors that Harold could feel through the soles of his feet 50 yards away. Dust erupted in clouds around her footfalls, and smaller animals fled in all directions from the path of her fury. But even as she closed the distance, Harold's heart sank with the realization of what he was witnessing, the terrible mathematics of the situation. The anaconda, sensing the approaching threat, raised its massive head in warning. The serpent's eyes, cold as black diamonds, fixed on the charging elephant, with the reptilian indifference of a creature that had survived the extinction of countless species. This was not personal, it was simply the collision of two fundamental forces: the predator's imperative to feed, meeting the mother's imperative to protect. Harold found himself caught between two equally powerful impulses. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to break his own carefully maintained protocol of non-interference. His hands shook as they gripped his walking stick, knuckles white with the effort of restraint. But alongside the urge to act ran the deeper knowledge that this moment belonged to the participants alone, that his interference would not save the calf, but would violate something sacred about the integrity of wild existence. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks as he forced himself to bear witness rather than interfere. This was the terrible privilege of the observer to see everything, to feel everything, but to remain apart from the action that could change outcomes. His role was to witness and remember, to carry this moment forward in memory, even if it ended in tragedy. The mother elephant's initial charge seemed to offer hope. Her massive presence should have been enough to intimidate any predator. And for a moment, it appeared that sheer size and fury might carry the day. But the anaconda was already committed to its prey, and releasing the calf would mean acknowledging defeat in a battle that millions of years of evolution had programmed it to win. The snake's coils tightened further, and the calf's struggles began to weaken as oxygen became increasingly scarce. Harold watched in anguish as the mother elephant circled the combatants, seeking an opening that would allow her to help without crushing her own offspring in the process. The terrible geometry of the situation became clear. The anaconda had positioned itself perfectly, using the calf's own body as a shield against retaliation. Any direct attack from the mother risked harming the very creature she was trying to save. The standoff stretched into minutes that felt like hours. The afternoon sun continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to the life-and-death struggle unfolding beneath it. Birds resumed their calls. Insects continued their buzzing, and the world maintained its rhythm, even as three lives hung in the balance. This was perhaps the most profound lesson of the wild, that individual tragedies, no matter how intense, were merely brief interruptions in the larger symphony of existence. But then, something remarkable began to unfold before Harold's disbelieving eyes. The mother elephant's frantic energy underwent a transformation, channeling itself from raw emotion into something approaching calculation. Her movements became more deliberate, her trumpeting ceased, and her eyes took on a quality of intense concentration that Harold had never witnessed before. It was as if he was watching the birth of strategy, the moment when instinct evolved into intelligence. The elephant began to circle the anaconda with methodical precision. Her massive head lowered as she studied the configuration of coils and flesh. Harold leaned forward, hardly breathing, as he realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in his decades of wildlife observation. This was not the blind fury of a desperate parent, but the calculated assessment of a problem that required a solution more sophisticated than brute force. With movements that seemed almost surgical in their precision, the mother elephant positioned herself at what Harold suddenly recognized as the optimal angle of approach. She had identified the anaconda's point of leverage, the section of its body that provided the anchor point for the constricting coils. Her massive foot rose and descended with the deliberate force of a piledriver. Not to crush, but to pin. Not to kill, but to neutralize. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The anaconda's head whipped around in fury and surprise, its carefully maintained position suddenly compromised. The serpent's entire strategy depended on the hydraulic pressure generated by its coiled body, and the elephant had instinctively understood and countered this fundamental principle. With a significant portion of its body pinned beneath several tons of elephant, the snake could no longer maintain the crushing force that was slowly squeezing the life from its prey. Harold's hands pressed against his chest as his heart hammered with sudden hope. What he was witnessing transcended the simple mechanics of predator and prey. This was intelligence in action, problem-solving ability that suggested cognitive processes far more sophisticated than most humans attributed to elephants. The mother had not simply reacted. She had analyzed, strategized, and executed a plan that demonstrated understanding of physics, anatomy, and leverage. With her opponent's primary weapon neutralized, the elephant turned her attention to the delicate task of extraction. Her trunk, that miraculous appendage capable of both devastating force and extraordinary tenderness. It began to probe the spaces between the anaconda's coils. Harold watched with held breath as the mother elephant demonstrated the full range of her trunk's capabilities. using it like a combination of crowbar and surgeon's instrument. The process required an almost impossible balance of power and restraint. Too much force would injure the calf, too little would fail to break the anaconda's grip. Harold found himself counting heartbeats, marking time by the rhythm of his own pulse, as the drama played out with agonizing slowness. The calf's movements had grown increasingly faint, and Harold realized with growing desperation that time was running out for the small elephant. The mother seemed to sense this urgency as well. Her movements became more decisive. In her trunk, working with increasing determination to create space between the coils and her offspring's body. The anaconda writhed in frustration, its powerful muscles straining against the elephant's pin. But 23 feet of serpent could not overcome several tons of determined pachyderm. Then, in a moment that Harold would replay in his memory for the rest of his life, something gave way. Whether it was a loosening of the anaconda's grip or a particularly effective manipulation by the mother's trunk, a gap appeared in the coils. The elephant seized this opportunity with the decisiveness of a master strategist, her trunk sliding deeper into the space and beginning to pry the coils apart with systematic determination. The anaconda's frustration boiled over into fury. Its massive head struck out repeatedly at the elephant's trunk. But the thick hide and dense muscle proved impervious to the snake's attempts at retaliation. This was not the snake's preferred method of combat. Anacondas were ambush predators, designed for the patient application of crushing force, not for the kind of dynamic battle that had developed around the trapped calf. Harold realized he was witnessing something that challenged his fundamental understanding of wildlife behavior. This was not simply maternal instinct, but creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. The elephant had not only identified the anaconda's weakness, but had developed and implemented a multi-stage plan to exploit it. The cognitive complexity required for such behavior suggested levels of intelligence that mainstream science was only beginning to acknowledge in elephants. With a final, tremendous effort, the mother elephant's trunk penetrated the innermost coil and wrapped around her calf's body. The contact seemed to galvanize both mother and offspring. The calf's struggles resumed with renewed vigor, while the mother's pulling became more forceful and determined. Harold felt his own muscles tensing in sympathy, as if he could somehow add his strength to the elephant's effort through sheer force of will. The moment of release came with shocking suddenness. The anaconda's grip, weakened by the sustained pressure and the elephant's systematic dismantling of its coiling strategy, finally gave way. The calf popped free like a cork from a bottle, tumbling to the ground in a tangle of legs and trunk, while the anaconda, suddenly deprived of its prize and its leverage, thrashed in impotent fury. But the drama was not yet concluded. The anaconda, though defeated, remained a formidable predator, and its proximity to the calf still represented danger. The mother elephant, as if reading Harold's thoughts, addressed this threat with the same methodical intelligence she had brought to the rescue operation. Rather than attempting to kill the serpent, a risky proposition that might have left her vulnerable to retaliation, she simply made its continued presence untenable. Her massive form loomed over the anaconda like a mountain of flesh and fury, and her trumpet of warning carried a clear message that transcended species boundaries: leave now, or face the consequences. The snake, perhaps recognizing that discretion was the better part of valor, began to withdraw toward the forest edge. Its movements were slower than its arrival had been. Dignity, somewhat intact, but the hunt clearly abandoned. Harold watched the anaconda's retreat with mixed emotions. Part of him felt relief at the successful resolution of the crisis, but another part recognized the tragedy inherent in the situation. The serpent had not been evil. It had simply been following the ancient programming that kept its species alive. In the harsh arithmetic of the wild, today's failed hunt might mean tomorrow's starvation. And Harold found himself hoping that the anaconda would find other opportunities that did not involve testing the protective instincts of elephant mothers. As the immediate danger receded, Harold's attention turned to the aftermath of the rescue. The calf lay motionless on the ground, and for a heart-stopping moment, he feared that the victory had come too late. The small elephant's sides showed the clear impressions of the anaconda's coils, dark lines against the gray hide that testified to the crushing pressure it had endured. Its breathing was shallow and irregular, and its eyes remained closed. The mother elephant's response to her offspring's condition demonstrated the same focused intelligence she had brought to the rescue operation. She knelt beside the calf with surprising grace for such a massive creature, her trunk beginning a systematic examination that seemed almost medical in its thoroughness. She probed gently for injuries and checked for breathing, and began what could only be described as elephant CPR. Rhythmic pressure applied to the calf's chest and sides in an effort to stimulate respiratory function. Harold found himself holding his own breath in sympathy, counting the seconds that stretched into an eternity of uncertainty. The forest seemed to have fallen silent around them, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath, awaiting the outcome of this final act. Even the ever-present insect chorus had diminished to a whisper, creating a cathedral silence that made every sound seem amplified and significant. Then, like the first light of dawn, breaking over a dark landscape, the calf stirred. Its trunk twitched, then its eyes opened, blinking with the confused awareness of a creature returning from the edge of oblivion. The small elephant's first instinct was to seek its mother, and the reunion that followed was so profound in its emotion that Harold felt his own eyes filling with tears. The mother's rumble of relief was a sound. Harold felt in his bones a frequency so low and so powerful that it seemed to resonate through the earth itself. She wrapped her trunk around her calf with infinite tenderness, pulling it close to her massive bulk in a gesture that needed no translation. The calf, still weak but clearly recovering, nuzzled against its mother's legs with the desperate affection of a creature that had glimpsed its own mortality and found safety again in the familiar presence of unconditional love. Harold watched this reunion through tears that he made no effort to hide. In his 8 decades of life, he had witnessed many profound moments, but few had touched him as deeply as this display of maternal love, transcending species boundaries. The elephant's intelligence, determination, and courage had created a miracle, transforming what should have been a tragedy into a testament to the power of love to overcome seemingly impossible odds. As the two elephants leaned into each other, their forms creating a sculpture of survival and devotion, Harold became aware of other sounds returning to the forest. The bird calls resumed their complexity. Insects began their buzzing chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a troop of baboons engaged in their raucous social negotiations. Life was reasserting its normal rhythm, but Harold knew that he had been privileged to witness something extraordinary, a moment when the veil between human understanding and animal experience had been lifted to reveal the profound depths of non-human consciousness. The afternoon sun had moved considerably during the drama, and Harold realized that hours had passed in what felt like minutes. His notebook lay forgotten in the grass beside his improvised seat, its pages fluttering in the breeze that carried the mixed scents of dust, vegetation, and the lingering musk of fear and triumph. When he finally retrieved the notebook and attempted to write, his hands shook so badly that the words were barely legible. Witness miracle. He managed to scrawl. Intelligence. Love. Survival. The words felt inadequate, but they would serve as triggers for memory. The reminders of the day when he had seen beyond the surface of wild existence into the deeper currents of consciousness that connected all living things. As the shadows lengthened and the golden light began its transformation toward the amber tones of evening, Harold prepared to leave his observation post. The elephants had moved away from the site of their confrontation, the calf walking, with slightly unsteady steps but clearly recovering its strength with each passing minute. The mother maintained close contact, her trunk frequently checking on her offspring's condition. Her massive presence, a constant shield between her child and a world that had proven capable of sudden, deadly surprises. Harold's walk back toward the research station was slower than usual, his mind struggling to process the profound experience he had witnessed. The rescue had lasted perhaps 20 minutes from start to finish, but those minutes had contained enough drama, intelligence, and emotion to fuel a lifetime of contemplation. He found himself questioning assumptions he had held for decades about the nature of animal consciousness, the depth of maternal bonds across species, and the sophisticated problem-solving abilities that lay hidden beneath the surface of what humans often dismissed as mere instinct. The path back to civilization wound through landscapes that now seemed different to Harold's altered perception. Each tree, each stone, Each blade of grass existed not as simple background, but as part of an interconnected web of consciousness that he was only beginning to understand. The forest was not just a collection of individual organisms competing for survival, but a community of intelligences, each adapted to its own ecological niche, but all connected by bonds of interdependence that transcended the traditional boundaries between species. As he walked, Harold became aware of the sounds that surrounded him, the complex communications of birds establishing territory and negotiating social relationships, the subtle rustling of small mammals moving through undergrowth, the distant calls of various ungulates maintaining contact with their herds. Each sound represented not just a simple vocalization, but a conscious decision, a deliberate communication that served specific purposes in the ongoing drama of survival and community that played out every day in the wild. The research station appeared through the trees as the sun touched the horizon, its solar panels and weather instruments seeming suddenly primitive compared to the sophisticated behavioral adaptations Harold had witnessed during the afternoon. The station represented humanity's attempt to understand the natural world through measurement and analysis. But Harold now realized that the most profound insights might come not from instruments, but from patient observation and the willingness to acknowledge the complex inner lives of the creatures that shared the planet. His colleagues at the station noticed his subdued demeanor immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen, the project's lead researcher, approached him with concern as he settled into his usual evening chair on the station's observation deck. Harold's appearance, his disheveled hair, his tear-stained cheeks, his hands that still trembled slightly, suggested that he had experienced something far beyond routine wildlife observation. "Harold, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," Sarah said, settling into the chair beside him with the easy familiarity of someone who had shared months of fieldwork in remote locations. Harold looked at her for a long moment, struggling to find words adequate to convey what he had witnessed. How could he explain the profound intelligence he had seen in the elephant's problem-solving approach? How could he describe the emotional depth of the mother's response to her offspring's danger? How could he communicate the spiritual dimension of watching love triumph over death in the most fundamental struggle of existence? "I saw something today that changed how I understand everything," he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I watched a mother elephant save her calf from an anaconda. But it wasn't just instinct, Sarah. It was intelligence, strategy. She analyzed the problem and developed a solution that demonstrated understanding of physics and anatomy that we barely give elephants credit for." Sarah's scientific training made her naturally skeptical of anthropomorphizing animal behavior. But Harold's obvious sincerity and his decades of experience gave his words considerable weight. She listened as he recounted the afternoon's events in detail, describing not just what had happened, but the quality of intelligence and emotion he had observed in the elephant's behavior. "The mother didn't just react with blind fury," Harold explained, his hands gesturing as he tried to convey the sophistication of what he had witnessed. "She assessed the situation, identified the anaconda's strategy, and developed a counter-strategy that neutralized the snake's primary advantage. Then she executed a rescue operation that required precise control of tremendous force. It was like watching a master engineer solve a complex mechanical problem under extreme time pressure." Sarah found herself caught between professional skepticism and growing fascination. Harold's description challenged conventional understanding of elephant cognition, but recent research had increasingly supported the idea that elephants possessed intelligence far more sophisticated than previously believed. Studies of elephant mourning behavior, their use of tools, their complex social structures, and their apparent capacity for self-awareness had already begun to revolutionize scientific understanding of pachyderm psychology. "Did you manage to document any of this?" she asked, her researcher's instincts engaging despite the emotional weight of Harold's account. Harold shook his head ruefully. "My camera was in my pack, and by the time I thought to reach for it, everything was happening too fast. Besides, I'm not sure any photograph could have captured what was really significant about what I saw. The external actions were remarkable enough, but it was the quality of intelligence behind those actions that was truly extraordinary." As the evening deepened and the first stars appeared in the African sky, Harold continued to process his experience through conversation with Sarah and the other researchers who gathered to hear his account. Each telling seemed to reveal new layers of meaning, new implications for understanding the cognitive lives of the planet's largest land mammals. The incident would eventually become part of the station's official records. But Harold knew that its true significance lay not in scientific documentation, but in its power to transform human understanding of the natural world. That night, as Harold lay in his simple bunk, listening to the sounds of the African night, he found his mind returning repeatedly to the moment when the elephant's trunk had finally freed the calf from the anaconda's deadly embrace. The image had burned itself into his memory with the clarity of revelation, becoming a symbol of everything he had learned about the depth and sophistication of non-human consciousness. The rescue had lasted only minutes, but those minutes had contained lifetimes of meaning. Harold realized that he had been privileged to witness not just a dramatic wildlife encounter, but a profound demonstration of intelligence, love, and courage that transcended the boundaries between species. The elephant mother's actions had revealed the existence of cognitive and emotional depths that challenged humanity's assumptions about its own unique place in the hierarchy of consciousness. In the days that followed, Harold found himself returning repeatedly to the site where the rescue had taken place. The physical evidence of the confrontation had largely disappeared. The disturbed earth had been smoothed by wind and rain. The broken vegetation had been cleared by various scavengers, and the normal rhythm of forest life had resumed its eternal cycle. But for Harold, the location remained sacred, a place where he had glimpsed something profound about the nature of consciousness and the bonds that connected all living things. The incident became a turning point in Harold's understanding of his role as an observer of wildlife. He realized that his purpose was not simply to document animal behavior, but to serve as a bridge between human and non-human experience, translating the profound truths he witnessed in the wild into forms that could expand human understanding and empathy. The elephant's rescue of her calf became the first chapter in what Harold began to think of as his true life's work, not just observing nature, but interpreting its deeper meanings for a human audience that desperately needed to understand its connection to the larger community of consciousness that included all living things. As weeks passed and the immediate emotional impact of the rescue began to integrate into Harold's broader understanding of the natural world, he found himself writing with new purpose and clarity. His notebook entries became less focused on simple behavioral observations and more concerned with the philosophical implications of animal consciousness. He wrote about the elephant mother's problem-solving abilities, about the emotional depth revealed in her response to her offspring's danger, and about the implications of such sophisticated cognition for humanity's relationship with the natural world. The story of the rescue spread through the research community and beyond, becoming part of the growing body of evidence that supported revolutionary new understandings of animal intelligence and emotion. Harold's account, corroborated by his decades of credible fieldwork, added weight to arguments that elephants possessed cognitive abilities that rivaled those of primates and challenged traditional hierarchies of intelligence that placed humans at the apex of consciousness. But for Harold, the scientific implications of what he had witnessed were secondary to its personal impact. The rescue had fundamentally changed his understanding of his place in the natural world, transforming him from an outside observer to a participant in a larger community of consciousness that included all sentient beings. He had seen beyond the surface of animal behavior into the deeper currents of thought and emotion that connected all living things. And this vision had become the foundation for a new phase of his life's work. Years later, as Harold continued his observations in forests and savannas around the world, he would carry with him the memory of that afternoon when love triumphed over death through the application of intelligence, strategy, and unwavering determination. The image of the elephant mother freeing her calf from the anaconda's deadly coils had become a symbol of everything he had learned about the profound connections that bound all life together in an intricate web of consciousness and carry. The story had become his testament to the sophisticated inner lives of the creatures with whom humans shared the planet, a reminder that intelligence and emotion were not uniquely human attributes, but part of the broader heritage of consciousness that connected all sentient beings. In witnessing the elephant's rescue of her calf, Harold had glimpsed the future of human-animal relationships, a future based not on domination and exploitation, but on recognition, respect, and the understanding that consciousness in all its forms deserved protection and reverence. From the acacia forest where it began, to the research stations and universities where it was studied, to the hearts and minds of everyone who heard it, the story of the elephant mother's courage became more than just an account of wildlife behavior. It became a bridge between species, a testament to the power of love to overcome seemingly impossible odds, and a reminder that in the community of consciousness that included all living things, every act of courage and compassion rippled outward to touch lives across the boundaries of species and time. The afternoon sun that had witnessed the rescue continued its eternal journey across African skies, illuminating countless other dramas of survival, intelligence, and love that played out daily in the wild places of the world. But for Harold, for the researchers who studied his account, and for everyone who heard the story of the elephant mother's incredible rescue, in that particular afternoon had become a window into the profound depths of consciousness that connected all living things in an unbreakable web of shared existence and mutual care.